So in any case, this is the Kitsap Sun Editorial Board. We're talking to Tina Robinson, who's a candidate for Kitsap County Prosecutor. I'll offer you 2 minutes just to introduce yourself and tell us anything you like. Jim will be the timekeeper, and so when he kind of waves, kind of try to wrap it up after that.
Okay.
So go ahead. Welcome.
I'm Tina Robinson, and I am running for Kitsap County Prosecutor. I have been working with this Kitsap County Prosecutor's Office for 8 years as a public defender. I've been defending persons accused of felonies, so I have had the opportunity to know exactly what's going on in the office as far as the criminal division goes. And over the years, I have sort of seen abuses that I've just been uncomfortable with, abuses of undercharging, overcharging, use of resources, things like that. And I decided, rather than complain, because we sort of would bring up issues with the prosecutor's office, and so rather than complain, decided it was time to do something about it. And so that's why I'm running for Kitsap County Prosecutor. Other than my experience, my 8 years as a lawyer, I also have 12 years as in the medical field as a manager. I have managed up to 50 employees at a time, and I have managed a multi-million-dollar budget. So I know how to run a business. I also, in doing that, I also know how to work with other organizations. I've had to do that many times, to work with other departments within the large organization that I work with was Group Health Cooperative. So I know how to work with a lot of different departments in an organization when you're going to make changes, and when things affect everybody is so much of what the prosecutor's office does. I know how to work collaboratively with other people, such as, in this case, it would be law enforcement and other community members. So I believe that I'm really qualified. I have the qualifications to do this, and I'm very passionate about the law, and especially the criminal law. I want to see people who are committing crimes over and over and over, especially violent crimes and predatory crimes, such as those against our personal security, residential burglaries, identity theft, things like that. I want to see them harshly prosecuted. So that's the main reason that I decided to run for prosecutor.
Tell me about, you said you're a person who's seen changes, done that in your other careers, and it's something you would like to see in this office. Mm-hmm. Maybe tell me, if you're elected, what's the approach to doing that? Obviously, Russ Hauge's been there, he's been there quite a long time, and so it's anytime change, if that's what's going to happen, that's a big haul when you start. So where do you start? What do you see? Pinpoint what has to be changed? How do you approach this?
Well, the charging decisions, I think, is something that can be addressed fairly quickly. I mean, that's something, there are policies that have been put in place, and I know that the incumbent actually pulled together a team of people twice to talk about what those policies were going to be, and what the charging decisions were going to be, and how they might be done. And many of those are very good, and I think that we can just follow through with those, but implement them.
What specifically implement?
Implementing, for example, charging people. It says we will charge them with what we believe that they can be, that we can prove, and what tells the story of their criminal activity. Well, what I see actually happening is the goal is to really get people to take responsibility, plead guilty quickly so that we're not in a long drawn-out trial, and get restitution. However, in many cases, especially with cases such as residential burglary, where a person is on a crime spree and they're committing a lot of burglaries, the prosecutor's office may charge them with only 1 or 2 counts of residential burglary, and include in the plea agreement that they will be responsible for restitution for all of the other ones, which is fine, except that means that person's probably going to be out on the streets pretty quickly. a lot quicker than they would if they were charged with, let's say they did 10 burglaries. And I'm not saying we need to charge them with 10 burglaries, but maybe we need to charge them with 5 burglaries, something that would get them a reasonable sentence, a harsh sentence for what they've done to our community.
How do you make that decision? What's the, maybe, I don't know if it's a philosophical question, or because what you're talking about is this range of things you could go after. Right now you're saying they are not going after what they could. Where do you, how would you set that line?
Well, that is something that you're talking about. You've got a lot of victims involved. That's what I'm talking about. Something with a lot of victims involved. And those victims need to have a voice. Okay, so that's one of the biggest things that needs to happen, is the victims need to have a voice in what happens to this person who's taken away the security in their home, for example. That's something I don't see happening as much as it should. So that's one of the first things. The other thing is you let your staff know, this is what I expect. When you see this much of this kind of crime, and it's against strangers, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. You have residential burglaries that are against mom or dad. Somebody broke in, your kid broke in and stole something from you. That's different. So when we're talking about predatory stuff, that's what I would want my attorneys to know. These are things that we need to prosecute aggressively when they involve strangers and they're predatory like that. And I think that's just something you communicate to your staff. But you also have to talk to the victims.
You represent, what do you do now again?
I represent those people who are breaking into your homes.
Okay, you're a public defender.
I am.
What's your experience been like working with the prosecutor's office, and what do you think from that perspective can be improved on?
Working with the prosecutor's office and as a defense attorney? Well, there are a couple of things. One is that when they do make changes, actually to processes, when the prosecutor has made changes, and the biggest change they made was the institution of the felony early plea unit, the FEPU, where they filed the felonies in district court. That was not even communicated to the defense bar until it was happening. We were not included in what was happening, how it was going to happen. We just sort of were told, oh, this is now being done and you've got these hearings here. And it was like maybe a week or 2 weeks before they were implementing it. And we were stumbling over what was happening. And it was not easy for us to grasp how this could happen and what was supposed to be happening and how it was supposed to flow. So there's not a lot of working with the people that the work is going to affect.
How did that affect the people you were representing?
Well, they were totally confused, wanting their speedy trial within 60 days or 90 days when their speedy trial rights didn't start, and we didn't really realize that's what was happening as well. So they were a little bit, they were confused and and we weren't informing them because we weren't really understanding what was happening. So it delayed the process for them, and it confused defendants. It still does. It still confuses defendants. It still confuses families, victims, because they don't know what's happening still when they get there and they show up to this courtroom full of people, and there's no judge that's there, and there's just a bunch of attorneys talking and a bunch of people there, and where's the defendant if they're in custody? They're not there. So it's just been it's still very confusing. But at the time that it actually happened, it was, as far as the defendants, they were just confused. And part of it was we also didn't know.
You didn't know.
So we couldn't explain it to them.
If it's communicated better, is it still a good policy from your perspective?
No.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, the reason that, according to the incumbent, that it was implemented was to save money, save time, cut down on court appearances, and especially that I think, and I've read in many of his reports, that his words were, every every felony took 4 to 7 hearings in Superior Court, which absolutely is not true. There would be an arraignment, and the majority of the cases, especially if you had it in custody and they're not looking at a whole bunch of time, especially the in custodies, would resolve by omnibus, the very next hearing. It's only if you've got somebody who's really looking at going to trial, or they're looking at a long time, that it might take more hearings. He also said that the hearings would take more than an hour. Many of them would take more than an hour, which is absolutely not true. They take minutes because they're usually just a continuance, unless there was a special hearing set, and those still happen. If a person's going to go to trial, that's still happening. So what's happening now and it's different for in custodies and out of custodies. If they're out of custody, a defendant is very happy to delay, because it pushes them, keeps them out of custody longer, and it also weakens the state's case many times because they may lose witnesses over time. So when it's in the FIPU system, there's no real oversight, and it's supposed to be a 30-day thing. Some of these things get continued on and on and on for months and months and months.
Is in the annual report, there was this statistic on the reduced number of trials. Is that something that's significant at all when you look at that statistic?
You know, I was trying to actually figure, I think this is one of them that I was trying to figure out this morning. And trying to figure out if this was more once they get into Superior Court. Because what actually happens is many of the cases will be reduced, and depending on who's handling that case. When they first started the FIPU, they had more of the supervisor type persons handling the FIPU so that they could make a decision easily. And for the most part, they have a couple of those, but they also, in the drug unit, have somebody who has to get permission from one of her 2 supervisors in order to be able to make a reduction. So it's also my understanding from talking to some of the prosecutors that they don't all fill out these little forms about their reductions that they do. So I don't know that this is really adequate or accurate. I think accurate is the word I'm looking for. One of the reports that I was looking at, it actually kind of said what were the cases filed in Superior Court, and so I'm not sure that this is the same one that I was looking at this morning, and the reductions from there. And so the reductions there were very minimal, and I think that's because they were cases that were filed in Superior Court, which is not all cases, because cases get reduced, they do get reduced in district court, and they never go to Superior Court. So when you look at some of the numbers, like you see the reduction over the years of how many were filed in Superior Court, where you see 794, I think, or 798, I think, in 2010, it's because not every case that gets filed in district court as a felony remains a felony, and it can resolve in district court without ever going to Superior Court. That actually caused a problem for public defense because they got a grant based on how many cases are filed in Superior Court.
So a public defender wants the cases to be in Superior Court and not moved over to district court like this program does?
Sure.
That's,
yeah, it affected the grant money that the public defender's office got.
okay.
Yeah.
We asked the incumbent about 3 issues to briefly touch on, because these are 3 things that have kind of been in our headlines lately and are kind of thematically across the county as far as crime goes. One of them is the rise in heroin use that we're kind of documenting in a lot of stories and police reports. The second is mental illness and its intersection with crime, and using the jail as a hospital, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And the third one is repeat offenders that local police say we're spending an inordinate amount of time arresting the same people again. So if you're the prosecutor, how do you touch on each one of those things? What's your office's role in addressing those issues?
Well, some of those issues are very complex. The mentally ill especially is a very complex issue. I myself have become very concerned with the heroin because I see myself representing more and more of them. The other day I actually filled out pulled out all of my drug cases, which right now I'm getting a lot of those kind of cases. So I pulled them all out thinking, do I have more heroin than meth? And I was surprised that I didn't, because they seem so much more prevalent, the heroin. And maybe it's because of the facts of the case that they seem more prevalent, and that a lot of the cases are being discovered with people sitting in cars with needles in their arms. And I know that I've had clients recently that have overdosed from at young ages from heroin. So it's something that really concerns me. And I've been doing a lot of research on it even before I started thinking about running for office, and looking at what other states are doing about it. And they're in the heroin is it's a social issue. It's not just young kids who are doing it. I mean, look at the meat of the actresses and the actors who are dying from it. It's many people who end up using it. They use it. They either got addicted to pain medications, and then from a legitimate prescription, and then went on to heroin because they were addicted and were no longer getting it. And so it affects people who would seem to be upstanding citizens who work and carry on a job. And then it becomes a situation where people have to use it just to stay well. They're not taking it to get high, they're taking it to get well, because the withdrawals are pretty bad. So I think as a society, as a community, we need to recognize that it is a social problem and try to work with our healthcare community and law enforcement to try to get people into treatment before we get them into the system, but try to get the treatment systems available. Not necessarily drug court, everybody doesn't qualify for drug court, but getting them into appropriate, we've got to figure out how to do it. But that's something we cannot do on our own. We got to work with people in the community to do that. Okay, that was one question.
Sorry, I'll repeat them. Mental illness.
The mental illness, again, this is something that is something I'm very passionate about, because I represent a lot of people who are mentally ill. Some of the situation, I think we just need to use common sense. Is this something we should be charging and should be putting somebody in jail for? Especially when they're seeking help. And I am aware of cases where they've gone to the hospital, they said, I want help, I'm thinking about hurting somebody, I need help, and they're doing what they were told to do. They're recognizing they're in danger, they're going, and the hospital is trying to help them. They're telling them what they are afraid they're going to do, and either the hospital is turning them away, or and I'm just going to say there's this case that I'm aware of right now where the person said that they were thinking about hurting somebody, and the person they were thinking about hurting was the counselor. And so they said, don't send that counselor in here to see me. And they said, if you are, you need to restrain me. Don't send him in. And they didn't restrain him, and they sent that counselor in, and he attacked and 2 securities, and the person got little injuries, and that person is now facing felony assault for that when he went for help. And I question whether that is a reasonable time to charge him. He's in the hospital, he said he needed help. Restrain him and get him what he needs, But I've also, it's just funny, I happened to receive a phone call today from someone who said, we have a mentally ill person in our neighborhood who is terrorizing the neighborhood. They're terrorizing us. We call the police, they've been out here 26 times, but they're doing all this stuff, and though she's facing some criminal charges, she's doing this all hours of the night, and people are actually got restraining orders against her, and the police don't do anything about it. They come out there, they tell her. So there's a problem, because we can't have the mentally ill terrorizing our citizens, but our jails aren't the place necessarily for them. But if we don't have any other place, we shouldn't still leave them on the streets. I know that there is a movement going on within our county and I think part of the help is that there's this possibility of getting this 1% tax thing. And so they're looking at setting up the old work release to be a facility. And that is great, but it's not enough. That's temporary. So, we have some laws that allow for involuntary commitment if they're a danger, but they're not enough. They're the way they are written, it's hardly enough. I mean, even when families are saying, we know he's a danger, they're finding that they're not. We don't have rooms in our mental hospitals. It's a colossal problem. And we have to work with our legislature, we have to work with the community, with the law enforcement, and I know that they put in a lot of training to address dealing with them so that hopefully we're not shooting them.
If these are community problems, and I totally agree, I think everyone agrees with what you're saying, it would never be your office alone who's charged with that. What advantage do you have over your opponents at bringing those groups together, at making sure things can happen, at working with law enforcement, mental health centers, all that sort of thing?
Well, I think that my experience as a defense attorney in working with these people, I've kind of been one-on-one with them. And I think that experience sort of gives me an insight a little bit more into them and into the issues that we're dealing with. I am not a healthcare provider, but I am dealing with them one-on-one, whereas I'm not sure that too many of my other opponents are. I know that the incumbent's not. I know that the gentleman from Bainbridge Island has not done anything but be on the prosecution side, and Mr. Danielson, I'm not really sure. He does a little bit of everything, so I don't know. But I have one-on-one with him, so that gives me a little bit of insight. So I have, in working with at least the mental health department, we're probably a little bit on the same page because we really know what we're dealing with. And with law enforcement, they're out there dealing with it as well. So I think that because we have all of us have some grasp of what we're dealing with, that we can at least come together to try to recognize what it is that we need to do. And I don't have that answer, and I don't think anybody does right now. But I think if we work together, knowing just how big this issue is, and the mentally ill, some of them are really afraid of themselves. They're afraid of themselves. Some of them don't have a clue. Sometimes it's just that they just need to take medicine, but sometimes medication's not going to do it. So I'm also not opposed to mental health court because
a mental health court, similar to the drug court.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that would be because the issue is are these people, for those who are amenable to treatment and who can, if they get put on the right medication, it's just sort of keeping them there. Because a lot of times with mental health, and I don't know how much you have, how much involvement you have had with people who are mentally ill, but I find most of us have had some contact where we know somebody who's mentally ill that is great when they're on their medication and not when they're not, but when they're on their medication and they're doing great, they decide they don't need the medication, and so they go off. And so the mental health court, I think, would be able to help them to stay on and to work them through realizing that's where you need to stay so that they can be productive in our community.
Okay. And the third idea was the issue of repeat offenders, seeing the same criminals come through. What could the prosecutor's office be doing to just to better address that issue?
And I think I kind of said that at the very beginning. Is I think that, and I know that there is a system for recognizing. We can see that they've got this prior history, and that is charging them harsher. We have lots of enhancements that can be added, and we don't use them. Firearm enhancements are rarely ever added on charges unless somebody chooses to go to trial. And you threaten the person with that, they're not going to go to trial. They're going to take whatever that nice little sentence, even if it's 5 years versus 10 years, they're going to take the lower sentence. So we need to use our enhancements better. So it's keeping the repeat offenders off the street if they are violent or predatory people. We have other repeat offenders as well, and one of those, the drug offenses.
Most of
That's
your
a different problem, though.
most of your experience, I'll kind of follow this idea. Most of your experience on the defense side, what gives voters confidence that you can also be a good prosecutor?
I am passionate about the law. Okay, I recognize that this is an adversarial system. And as a defense attorney, it's my job to represent the defendant. I know I have been asked the question, you routinely argue this for defendants, are you going to change your mind now that you're running for prosecutor? Well, I'm not changing my mind, but I'm still going to do that as a defense attorney because I'm still a defense attorney. So it's my job as a defense attorney to represent the interest of the defendant. But as a prosecutor, it's my job to represent the interest of the state and the people of the community. And as I'm representing these defendants, I've had a few that have made me nervous, when they've told me how they chose that house to break into, and I knew it could have been my own, the way they described it. I do my job because it's what as an attorney, I'm ethically bound to do, and I'm passionate about the law. I recognize in this work how our victims have been ignored or not listened to in many cases, and I've had many of them contact me, even recently, saying they're not even going to charge this person. And it's identity theft type stuff. Excuse me. So they're not listened to, and I am really passionate about victims and their rights.
What would you change within the office to ensure that happens?
Well, that's a cultural change. It is a cultural change that needs to happen. I come from a customer service background. Working in the medical field and as a manager and ensuring that customer service was delivered. And I don't care where you are, that needs to flow. We all have customers, and victims are people that we need to be listening to and treat them as though they're our customer, okay? And so I don't know if it's giving my staff customer service training, and it'll be training. It's a cultural change that needs to take effect, and it's not going to be easy. And some people, I'm not sure that they can get there.
If you were to come in, start doing cultural change, start saying these are our priorities, are there things you see the office doing right now that it's spending too much time on, that maybe that's not our role, we should be focused over here?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Oh, are there priorities you would change? Things you see the current prosecutor's office doing? They do this contract work with municipalities, or all of the civil work that comes through, or maybe you'd say, we don't need to do as much of that, we need to put our energy over here.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily what I would do. And I don't think you can really say what I'm going to do this. I know that some of my opponents will say this is exactly what I'm going to do, and I don't think that necessarily works. You can't move King County into Kitsap County. What I would need to do, there is work that's being done that I'm not aware of, and the civil department, I want to get in and just do a top-down evaluation to see what is being done. From what I can see, there's a lot of litigation that probably doesn't need to be happening. So I know that public disclosure requests are not getting out in a timely manner. I don't know what that is. So there are some issues that need to be addressed, but I'm not exactly sure what those are. The other thing is focusing on, you know, what kind of cases do we take to trial? I think that's a big issue. Is taking this case really a cost-effective for the county to take this particular? And I'm going to give you an example. And this may not be very popular with people, but it is an example, okay? Our prosecutor's office charges, if you look, they charge a lot of drug crimes, and they have very, very few reductions and very few declines in the drugs, in drug cases. But they have lots of declines in the general unit and lots of declines in the special assault unit. The drug cases, majority of them.
Wait, just to clarify, when you mean declines, they see an effect on the number of crimes being committed?
No.
No. Okay.
The declines is what the referrals. So law enforcement arrests somebody or has contact with somebody, and they send a referral to the prosecutor. The prosecutor decides what they're going to charge, and they decline to charge.
Decline to charge. Okay.
So that's what a decline is. So they decline to charge, and those are in the annual report. So he declines to charge, but they charge most of the drug cases, and because they're so easy to prove, they're easy to prove. It doesn't take much. If you've ever been, have you ever been a jury on a jury? If you've ever been on a jury on a residue case where you got the evidence is a baggie, a little baggie, and you can't see anything in it. There's nothing in there at all. But all they need to do is be able to scrape a toothpick amount in order to get you a positive test for drugs, and so that becomes a felony possession. And if a person doesn't want to take responsibility, or they say, I didn't know it was there, you go to trial on an unwitting possession or whatever. Chances are they're going to get convicted, but you've brought 45 people in from the community to sit in a jury box to figure out 12 or 13 who's going to sit on the jury. It takes longer to select the jury than it does to do the trial, and just to get that conviction, which may get the person 30 days in jail. Most it's going to get them is 2 years in jail. I mean, that's what it's going to get, depending on what their history is. So is that really a good use of our resources? Drugs need to be addressed. Dealers need to be addressed. But we have a crime called use of drug paraphernalia. And that's really what that crime is, which is a misdemeanor charge where you can get them, or require them to get treatment and be on court supervision. So I'm not sure, we don't really get that much for what that is. So that's something that I think, and I believe that other counties do charge those as use of paraphernalia and not as felony charges, unless it's a certain amount. So do we put too much into that when we could use the resources elsewhere to focus on these more serious crimes and focus on better service for victims?
I thought there was a question in there.
No, I'm just flying the wall.
You guys, just want to make sure.
Anybody?
Just want to offer a chance.
No, I was just writing this stuff down.
Okay.
Sorry.
I did want to ask you about one other thing you had in the voter's guide, and it was addressing youth crime and kind of juvenile truancy is what you said. That was kind of at the core of some kids going down the wrong path. What's the prosecutor office, what's the role there, and how do you think you'd address that?
Well, you know, the prosecutor can get involved in community programs to help teach people about what's to come and how to stay out of it. And my vision is something of, right now we have a truancy program where if they're missing school, they have to report to the court, and you know, if they go to the court, and the court has them write an essay and do stuff like that. Anyway, it's not necessary. It's not working. It's not working to keep our kids in school. when kids are missing school, there's an underlying problem. What is that problem? Sometimes it's their parents are totally unengaged. Sometimes that's not the issue. Sometimes it's, there's some mental health issue that's going on with the kid, or maybe there's problems going on at home. So it's bringing the parents and the teachers and the kids and the prosecutor, having the prosecutor being involved, having a person who's dedicated to working with those families in trying to see what we do to keep these kids in school and trying to keep them out of the truancy program, as well as the and law enforcement. I want to add law enforcement to that. I don't know what it was like when you guys were kids. I kind of remember, if we did something that was silly or stupid, it'd be the threat. In fact, I know I did it once with my son when he stole something at a store, and he was like 5 years old, and he stole something and took him back to the store and made him tell on himself and return it and pay for it. It was to teach him a lesson. And nowadays, what we do is the kids screw up and they're in the criminal justice system. And so that's why it used to be law enforcement would be involved to help teach people and teach kids how do you stay out of the system. We used to have the Just Say No program, and I don't know whatever happened to that, but I think it's long gone, where law enforcement was in there talking to our kids and trying to encourage them to go the right way. And I just think that if we as law enforcement, prosecutor, teachers, community come together to deal with and address those kids that are having those problems, that maybe we could divert some of this.
Well, we're coming up on the end of our time. What we usually do is let you close. Give us a last statement. Any issues we didn't touch on that you'd like to leave us with, or any other last words that we need to hear?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are lots of issues that I'm learning as I've been doing this. It is time for change. I believe that the incumbent 20 years ago went into the office, he had a mess. And I believe that he did some good things. He did a lot of good things, and he cleaned up some mess. But I think that he's lost perspective. And I think that perspective, unfortunately, it's this culture that I talk about, that's where they're not recognizing the victims. It's coming from the top. A lot of the younger attorneys I see disrespecting the bench, and I think it's just because the perspective has been lost. And that's why I think that it's time for change. It's time to get some new fresh blood in there. And I think I'm that fresh blood because I am not someone who's had my entire life and career in the law. I've had a whole world of life experience that I bring with me, and I think that will benefit this office. Besides nearly 10 years in the Air Force, my management experience with group health, and just living life as a citizen, not immersed in the law. I have common sense that I bring, and I think that that's what we need in this office right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming in. We appreciate your time.